The Illuminati, a hidden order ruling the world from behind the curtain. A dark organization that brings down kings, starts revolutions, designs wars, and pulls the strings of money, politics, and media at the same time. Today, when most people hear the word Illuminati, this is the image that appears in their mind. But how much of that image is real? And how much of it is legend? Because here is the most interesting part. The Illuminati was not a completely invented name. It was a real organization. But the fact that it really existed in history does not mean that all the power stories attached to it are true. In fact, the story of the Illuminati shows us how a small historical event can, through fear, rumor, political conflict, and popular culture, grow into a massive global myth. And maybe the real question is this: did the Illuminati take over the world? Or did people create a shadow called the Illuminati to explain their fears? In this video, we are going to explore how the legend of the Illuminati was born, what this organization really was, why it was founded, why it was banned, and how a small secret society that survived only a few years turned into one of the most powerful conspiracy myths in modern history. This story begins in 18th century Europe, in the Age of Enlightenment, the age of reason, science, debate, and questioning. At that time, the old order in Europe was beginning to crack. The absolute authority of the church was being challenged. The idea that kings ruled by divine right was being questioned. People were starting to place reason above tradition. But these new ideas were not safe for everyone, especially in the German states and in more conservative regions like Bavaria. Religious and political authority was still extremely strong. And it was in this atmosphere that a man named Adam Weishaupt emerged. Weishaupt was a professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt. He had received a Jesuit education, but he had become critical of traditional religious authority. He was influenced by Enlightenment ideals. In his eyes, society was being suffocated by ignorance, dogma, religious pressure, and arbitrary political power. He believed humanity needed a more rational, more free, and more virtuous order. But openly defending such ideas was not easy in Bavaria at the time. So he turned to secrecy. On May 1st, 1776, he founded a small group. At first, its members called themselves the Perfectibilists, roughly meaning people capable of being perfected. But over time, this group became known as the Bavarian Illuminati, the enlightened ones. And here, the word light did not mean magic or supernatural power. At least not in the beginning. It meant the light of reason against the darkness of ignorance. So the organization's original purpose had far more to do with the political and philosophical tensions of the Enlightenment than with the dark global domination stories spread online today. And yet, the irony is obvious. The more they chose secrecy, the more mysterious they appeared from the outside. And history shows us something again and again. The more a group hides itself, the more people begin to fill it with meaning. In its early years, the Illuminati was fairly limited. A small circle, selected members, strict discipline, obedience, gradual promotion through ranks. Weishaupt deliberately designed the organization as a hierarchy. There was a disciplined structure influenced by the Jesuit order. At the same time, it borrowed certain structural ideas from Freemasonry. Members were divided into degrees. They used code names. They exchanged encrypted letters. And the internal culture reinforced a sense of mystery. Weishaupt himself even used the code name Spartacus. Details like these may have strengthened the group's inner discipline at the time. But centuries later, they would become the perfect material for conspiracy stories. Because people love these things in history. Code names, secret correspondence, symbols, degrees, inner circles. These details always ignite the imagination. Yet reality is often more ordinary. In the beginning, the Illuminati was not a giant network controlling the world. Even though it grew over a few years, most research suggests that at its peak, it probably never had more than around 2,000 members. So it was not an invisible empire secretly ruling Europe. It was a limited but ambitious secret society trying to expand its influence. Still, there was one thing that should not be underestimated. Weishaupt and his circle were trying to attract educated, wealthy, and influential people. Their goal was not to launch an immediate street revolution. Their goal was to spread ideas through the elite. That is why their contact with Masonic lodges became so important. After 1778, the organization built stronger ties with Masonic circles, especially after an important figure named Adolf von Knigge joined the group. Knigge played a major role in the expansion of the organization. Through him, the structure became more systematic, more attractive, and more capable of growing. Masonic lodges were already semi-secret, ritual-driven, and elite spaces. By moving into those networks, the Illuminati gained both prestige and access. And this is exactly where the first seed of the legend was planted. Because from the outside, the image looked like this: a secret society entering another secret society. And that alone was enough to create suspicion. Now add the political and religious atmosphere of the time. Europe was full of tension in the years before the French Revolution. Ideas were spreading. Power structures were becoming nervous. The church and the courts saw almost any independent network of thought as a threat. In an age like that, a secret group reaching young nobles, intellectuals, and Masonic circles was always going to attract attention. The Illuminati described itself with the language of reason, virtue, and free thought. But to governments and conservative circles, it looked very different. To them, this was an organization eating away at the existing religious and political order from the inside. Its critical attitude toward religion, its suspicion of monarchy, and its secret structure all increased the fear around it. Eventually, that fear turned into repression. In 1785, the Bavarian government banned the organization. Internal conflicts had already weakened it. Some members were arrested. Some were exiled. Weishaupt lost his position and was forced out of Bavaria. And the historical record tells us something important. After 1785, there's no reliable evidence that Weishaupt's Illuminati continued in any active form. So if you look at the story on paper, it should end here. A short-lived secret society was founded. It tried to grow. It was banned. It dissolved. End of story. But this is exactly where the real story begins. Because sometimes, the physical death of a group becomes its mythological birth. The Illuminati ended as a real organization and began to rise as a legend. Why? Because people are fascinated by secret groups that disappear. When an organization vanishes, it is often more tempting to say it went underground than to say it truly ended, especially if it leaves behind codes, documents, names, rumors, and political fear. The true mythologizing of the Illuminati did not begin when it was founded. It began after it was gone. By the 1790s, Europe had been shaken to its core. The French Revolution had exploded. Kings and aristocrats were terrified. Defenders of the old order were desperate for an explanation. Because for some people, It was not enough to explain a massive event like the French Revolution through social inequality, economic crisis, political repression, and new ideas. A collapse that dramatic felt like it needed a more hidden, more evil, more organized force behind it. And this is where two names become especially important: Augustin Barruel and John Robison. In books published in 1797, they argued that the French Revolution had been planned by secret societies, especially the Illuminati. Barruel portrayed the revolution as the result of a hidden conspiracy meant to destroy the throne, the church, and the aristocratic order. Robison made similar arguments, suggesting that Masonic lodges, reading societies, and Illuminati networks had been working together against the European order. And this is a critical turning point, because now, the Illuminati stopped being just a banned secret society. It was presented as the invisible architect behind one of the greatest upheavals in modern history. This is where the heart of the legend truly began to beat. People no longer imagined the Illuminati as what it had been. They imagined it as the shadow behind every major event they wanted to explain. And this is a very powerful narrative pattern, because it is much easier to connect complex history to one evil center than to understand messy reality. Social conflict, economic collapse, ideological transformation, class struggle, religious tension. All of these are difficult to analyze. But saying there was a secret organization behind it all, that is simple. And because it is simple, it spreads. The Illuminati legend spread quickly. And it did not remain in Europe. It crossed the Atlantic into America. By 1798, there was already a growing fear of the Illuminati in the United States. Some religious leaders and conservative voices argued that revolutionary ideas and godlessness were entering society through secret organizations. And so the Illuminati changed once again. It was no longer just a short-lived Bavarian society. It became an international symbol of hidden danger. And the most important part of this transformation was this. At that point, the real members no longer mattered. What mattered was the creation of a symbolic enemy. An enemy people could not see, but believed was everywhere. And that is the most powerful form of a conspiracy theory. The less evidence there is, the bigger the story can become. Because imagination fills the empty space. As the years passed, real history became more blurred, and the legend grew larger. By the 19th century, and even more in the 20th, the name Illuminati no longer referred only to one organization. It started to represent ideas like invisible elites, hidden rulers, secret planners, and shadow power. At that point, anyone could attach their fear to that name. For some, it meant bankers. For others, revolutionaries. For others, Freemasons. For others, atheists. For others, aristocrats. For others, foreigners. For others, modernity itself. In other words, the Illuminati stopped being the name of a fixed organization and became a flexible container for collective paranoia. That is why, in different periods, completely opposite groups could both be accused of being Illuminati at the same time. Because conspiracy myths do not survive through logic. They survive through need. Whatever society wants to explain, the shadow organization reshapes itself to fit that fear. Sometimes it becomes the cause of economic collapse. Sometimes war. Sometimes moral decline. Sometimes cultural change. But why did the Illuminati, of all names, endure for so long? Why did so many forgotten secret groups disappear into history while this one survived? There are several reasons. First, the name itself is powerful. The enlightened ones, It sounds elevated, exclusive, and threatening at the same time. Second, it has a real historical core. It was not completely invented. It really was a secret organization. It really was banned. It really did use code names. It really did build connections with Masonic circles. And that real core gave later exaggeration something solid to cling to. Third, after massive historical events, people often search for invisible culprits, especially after traumatic turning points like the French Revolution. And fourth, modern media, newspapers, pamphlets, books, then novels, films, magazines, television, and later the internet. Every era reproduced the Illuminati in its own way. In the 20th century, the legend evolved again. Especially in the 1960s and after, figures like Robert Anton Wilson and Carrie Thornley helped revive the modern Illuminati myth through fiction, irony, and deliberate hoaxes. During this period, fact and fiction were intentionally blurred. Material that looked serious, but was partly playful or deceptive, was pushed into circulation. And the result was striking. People were no longer just talking about an old secret society. They were engaging with something that had become a self-renewing cultural virus. When the internet age arrived, the process accelerated even more. Because the internet is the perfect environment for conspiracy narratives. Fragmented information, images removed from context, symbols, coincidences, half-quotes, celebrities, political leaders, corporate logos, music videos, award shows. All of it can be arranged into one giant pattern. And the human mind loves patterns. Sometimes the patterns are real. Sometimes they are not. But we want to see them. And at that point, the Illuminati became the universal shadow projected onto the empty screen of the modern world. People claim to see it everywhere. In a singer's music video, on a banknote, in a political speech, in a hand gesture, in a company logo. By then, real history had almost completely faded into the background. Yet the historical record tells a much more limited story. A secret Bavarian group influenced by Enlightenment ideals. A short lifespan. A limited membership. A hierarchical structure. A ban. And after that, mostly rumor, political propaganda, cultural fear, and endless reinterpretation. And this is where we need to make a very important distinction. If someone asks, was the Illuminati real? The honest answer is yes. Historically, there really was an Illuminati. But if the question is, was it a single superorganization secretly ruling the world from the shadows? Or did it continue in that form across centuries? Then the historical answer is very different. There is no reliable evidence for that. That distinction may sound small, but it is essential if we want to understand the entire legend. Because conspiracy theories often build a massive fantasy on top of one tiny truth. And that tiny truth becomes a shield for everything else. Someone says, but the Illuminati really existed. And that is true. But behind that truth, hundreds of unproven claims can hide. That is exactly why the Illuminati myth is so durable. It is not completely false. But the version most often told is not history either. It exists in a strange zone between fact and myth. Half real, half imagined. There is also the issue of symbols. Today, many people point to the eye inside the triangle, especially the pyramid and the eye on the dollar bill, as proof of the Illuminati. But the use of that symbol on the Great Seal of the United States dates back to 1782. It has its own historical context as an official state symbol. The fact that it was later connected to the Illuminati does not prove that it was originally designed for that purpose. But this is exactly how legends work. First, a symbol is chosen. Then a story is attached to it. Then that story is repeated again and again. And after a while, people stop remembering the historical context of the symbol. They only remember the myth. That is where the modern image of the Illuminati gets its power. A name, an eye, a pyramid, a few hand signs, a little mystery, and the rest is completed by the imagination of the crowd. In truth, the legend of the Illuminati is not just the story of one organization. It is also the story of how people view power. Human beings want to see great plans behind great events. Randomness is unsettling. Complexity is exhausting. Scattered causes are unsatisfying. But the idea of a hidden intelligence, even if frightening, makes the world feel more understandable. Because then everything has an author. Did the economy collapse? Someone did it. Did a war begin? Someone planned it. Is society changing? Someone pushed the button. Thinking like this can create a false sense of order in a chaotic world. And the Illuminati myth answers exactly that psychological need. It reduces the noise of history to one dark whisper. But real history is usually messier, more human, and far less dramatic. There are competing interests. There is luck. There is failure. There is fear. There is greed. There is ideology. And sometimes events are not the result of one central plan, but of thousands of different forces colliding at once. Maybe the true power of the Illuminati myth comes from the fact that people are already uneasy about invisible power in the modern world. Because even today, financial systems, intelligence networks, lobbying circles, closed elite environments, and media relationships are real. Power is not always transparent. So people sometimes notice genuine secrecy in real life, and then build an imaginary superstructure on top of it. In that sense, the myth does not emerge from nothing. Real inequalities and hidden systems of influence feed the conspiracy imagination. But that imagination often goes beyond concrete history. It grows, it mutates, and eventually it becomes something else entirely. That is what the Illuminati truly is. A shadow figure born from a real historical core, expanded by political fear, shaped by propaganda, polished by literature and popular culture, and multiplied endlessly by the internet. So what can we say in the end? The legend of the Illuminati is not the direct historical story of a small Bavarian secret society rising into global domination. It is, above all, the result of humanity's fear of the unknown, its desire to explain great events through one hidden center, and its obsession with secret power. The organization founded by Adam Weishaupt in 1776 was real. It emerged from the tensions of the Enlightenment era. It was secret. It was ambitious. It had a brief period of influence. Then it was banned in 1785 and dissolved. But it gained its immortality not through what it did, but through what was later written about it. Writers like Barruel and Robison portrayed it as the dark architect of the French Revolution. Later centuries expanded that story even further. And in the end, the Illuminati crossed the boundary of history and became one of the most powerful figures in modern mythology. Maybe that is why it still appears everywhere today. Because the Illuminati is no longer just an organization from the past. It is a way the human mind gives a face to the unseen. More than a name. More than a group. It is a pattern of fear. A template of explanation. A ghost of an age. And perhaps the best way to end this video is with one final question. Does the legend of the Illuminati really reveal the power of a secret organization? Or does it reveal how vulnerable people feel in the face of invisible power? Maybe the real darkness was never inside a hidden society at all. Maybe it has always been growing inside the human mind that struggles to live with uncertainty.